with the wildlife today.
I
Out
am.
looking for Welcome to Juice Live Show. We do apologize for this delay. We were having some technical difficulties, which does happen. Of course, we know that. Our co-host Chantel Rhodes was unable to get on, and we just wanted to go ahead and try to proceed. We're going to proceed to the best of our ability without our fearless leader, Chantel Rhodes, here today. But she's with us in spirit, and she already gave us a list of stuff that we got to talk about. So I am one of your hosts, Dr. Cindy Banyai, along with
Sarah Wilson. Happy to be here today. Technical difficulties and all. And I'm coming to you live from the farm today. So please don't mind the wildlife and birds chirping behind me. Hopefully nothing pecks at me as it flies past to get to this tree for birdseed.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's a beautiful background. Like, and I see are those ibis walking behind you, and like really cool. I know you said you got like ducks and stuff around. I mean, if you didn't know this about Sarah, she has a farm. She's like a total farm girl. She looks like a city girl, but she's a farm girl.
I'm a city girl on the farm. That's what it is. I have farming in my blood, but I'm a little bit of both. I'm a Libra. I'm a true Libra. So I need all the balance. I need a little bit of everything to feel at equilibrium.
Nice. Well, that's great. Good. So we are here with the Juice Fresh Talk live show. It's our new format coming into 2024, where we're going live across social media and really trying to dive into issues like we usually do, but trying to do it at different times and see how this works out for us. So let me jump into, I know that Chantel gave us some topics to discuss, but I wanted to talk with what I saw you doing this weekend with some like really amazing work with the NAACP and some social justice issues right here in Fort Myers. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Oh, we are doing a lot with the Lee County NAACP. We have a lot going on, which I wish that was a good thing. But, you know, when you're a part of a social justice organization and you have a lot going on, that's usually not good stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But I do feel like we are doing great work to help remedy some of these issues that we're seeing here locally and at the state level. So this weekend, we had our first general membership meeting of the new year. And we are discussing a lot about the police-involved shooting of Christopher Jordan. That happened on December 1st, 2023, so just 2 months ago, which I can't believe it's already been that long. But Mr. Jordan was killed at his home by Fort Myers Police Department. And we are in the process of seeking justice, demanding justice, and we have gone to Florida Department of Law Enforcement. We have gone to FMPD. We have gone to the U.S. attorney, to the state's attorney, and now we are knocking at the door of the FBI. And they have recently opened an investigation. So we are going down whatever avenue it takes to ensure that justice is served. And
can you tell us just a little bit about that case? Because I don't know how many folks really know what's going on with it.
I know, and that's what's really disappointing, and that's kind of what I'm trying to change, is that there's very little talk about this. And, you know, we have seen some of these police-involved shootings and massive protests, massive demonstrations because of these unjust killings by police officers. And I want to see that here, because this truly is a terrible, terrible injustice. What happened is there was a domestic dispute between Christopher and his sister, who he lived with both of his sisters. And the police got called out due to that domestic dispute, and they came out. They were out at the property for 45 minutes. Chris was barricaded in his home by himself. There was no one else in there. It wasn't a hostage situation. He was alone. And the police were speaking to him on a megaphone. Meanwhile, all of this is being recorded live, right? Live on Facebook. And they were trying to get him to go to the window so that they could see that he was safe. They were trying to get him to pull back the curtain and show that he was okay, like a wellness check, because it was a mental health crisis situation.
Mm-hmm.
So in my mind, the first thought is, if you do think that he's armed, you're trying to prevent a suicide at that point, right? He's in the home alone. Like, if you're concerned, then that should be the highest level of concern, is a possible suicide. However, when he finally did go to the window to pull back the curtain, turn on the light, and show that he was in fact okay, they shot and killed him. This was after 45 minutes of being on site. There wasn't a negotiator called out. There was no mental health counselor called out. Nothing of the sort. They simply spoke to him on a megaphone, asked him to go to that window. And when he did, when he followed, when he complied, they shot him.
Wow.
And the thing about it is immediately after, Police Chief Fields released a statement saying that they shot because the officer that shot said that he pointed a gun at the window. Now that runs contrary to every witness statement we've heard. And we have asked for body cam footage to show like where the weapon was, what they did see, and they've refused to hand that over. FMPD has said that this is part of the FDLE investigation because it's been turned over to them for an independent investigation. And we also confirmed with FDLE that Fort Myers PD has full authority and discretion to release that information. They are not hindered by the investigation whatsoever. That has been confirmed. But furthermore, a couple days after this meeting that President Mwakil had with the police chief, they did release some of the body cam footage. Conveniently, they released the parts of the body cam footage that showed his sister saying that he was armed on the 911 call, that he did have a weapon, and when they first arrived on site. But the plot thickens, right? So they released that so that they look less culpable, right? So they look like, oh, we had reason to believe he was armed. A few days after that, Lee County NAACP, Councilwoman Watson, Councilman Streets, and the family receives an anonymous letter in the mail from an unidentified FMPD officer, signed concerned FMPD officer, stating that Chief Fields had communication with the city manager, the city attorney, and with the police on site, stating that they were well aware that he was unarmed and that they allowed that statement to be released to the public so that they didn't have what we've seen after every police-involved shooting since George Floyd, massive demonstrations. And now they're still not releasing the fact that there wasn't a weapon found on site. That's the only assumption we can make, is that there was not a gun, because we have seen anytime there's a police-involved shooting, the first thing that the police want to release is that we found a weapon. They were armed. Even though that doesn't always justify anything either. Let's be clear about that. You're dealing with trained professional police officers versus a civilian with a weapon. That shouldn't always be a death sentence either. But in this case, if there was a weapon found, that would have been the first information that FMPD would have released. So we are able to believe that there wasn't a weapon, just as the witnesses have said. And so we're fighting. We're going to keep fighting. We're trying to get the word out. We're trying to get the community rallied behind us, because you know this, Cindy, as well as I do, once this stuff starts happening. And this isn't the first time that we've had any incidents in Fort Myers, but Chief Diggs did a very good job of trying to clean up the police department. He really did. And now we're dealing with a new police chief. The NAACP, we tried to give him the benefit of the doubt when this first happened and said, okay, let's see what the investigation says. And as more details came out, the more we're not confident at all that they're doing the right thing, and that we need to keep a very close eye and make sure that accountability is served in this situation, or we're opening a can of worms that I don't think our community even understands yet.
No, and I think that's true, because, I have not seen, aside from you, frankly, like I haven't seen anybody really talking about this or discussing it. And that's, it's not uncommon. It's not uncommon for this type of thing, like in Fort Myers, to be like, oh, that's like a really bad political thing. And then the news, the papers, the local media, they do the very bare minimum, and then they bury it, because there are powerful people who have influence, and they don't want these types of things to get out. And it's true. And it's very sad and disturbing, and but not surprising, sadly.
Right. It's not. And that's the one thing that the Lee County NAACP is dedicated to right now. I mean, we have promised the family and the community that we're not stopping. We're not going to allow this to be swept under the rug, and we will continue to seek whatever measures, whatever legal measures that we can to make sure that they get justice and we get justice, that our community gets the justice that they deserve, and that we don't continue to see this stuff happening. We need to do what other municipalities have done successfully and create mental health crisis response teams. Like
Yep.
I keep hearing when I bring this up to people is, but FMPD is trained in crisis response. No, I am talking about non-police mental health specialists to go out in situations like this. A mental health crisis should never be a death sentence, and that's what keeps happening. So we have to put a stop to that, and it's going to take our community coming together to do that. But we have to acknowledge one other major factor, and I won't be so long-winded. This is the last thing I want to say about this, is that it's easy for us, because I was comparing, because we did do a vigil for Chris with his family, and I was a little bit, discouraged because I wanted to have a really big turnout, especially for his family, to show that the community supports them and are behind them. But compared to how many people turned out for our Tyree Nichols vigil last year, we had an excellent turnout for that. And the only conclusion I can come to, and understandably so, is that this is our own police. This is our own police. This is our own mayor, our own city manager. And many people have connections to the police department and to the city. And that makes it difficult. And also the fear component. Mm-hmm. Retaliation is real. And I mean, even for me, my wife has said, you're taking some bold steps, speaking out against the people you're speaking out against. And, I've made a commitment that regardless of that, I'm going to keep speaking out. But, I understand we are in a city that desegregated last in the South. Like, we are one of the last cities to desegregate. There's still a lot of fear, and rightfully so. So I have to show a little bit of understanding that there are additional complexities and nuances to this situation that cause people to not want to speak out as loudly.
Yeah. So the desegregation thing in the city has been it's different. So the school district didn't formally desegregate according to federal desegregation policy in the education department until 1994.
Right.
So yeah. Right. And then they were under federal desegregation oversight until 2005. So this is not ancient history in the city. Also, there was integration is what they called it in the 70s. So it was 74 is when there was Black students were allowed to go to Fort Myers High School. Right. And there was still segregated public wash facilities and things like that until the 70s. So yeah, it's again not super ancient history in this region. Right. One thing I did want to pick up on that you said was that mental health thing, because I want to add some additional context to that here in the state of Florida, because, and I want to say, because a lot of folks who are, that when gun violence happens, the 2A people are mental health, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Right. So here's the problem with that argument is, one, we don't fund mental health, right? So we don't have really proper facilities to help people. We do not have enough staff. We have perennial openings, right? So the mental health argument is just a red herring, essentially, to move people away from gun violence. But what happens here in the state of Florida specifically is we have this piece of legislation called the Baker Act that allows the police and basically puts the police as the frontline intervention for mental health. It is in most places the only way you can access mental health services in the state of Florida. Right. And we put the police specifically in there. So what it is that if somebody is thought to be having, suicidal thoughts or whatever mental health issue, parents will call and Baker Act their kids. Schools will call and Baker Act their students so they can have somebody come and intervene, and they're held for their own protection for 24 hours at least. And then sometimes if they need greater mental health, they're referred to additional facilities. It's the only way, because most of the time, if you're trying to get basic mental health services, you're looking at an 18-month wait, particularly for juveniles. So it's the only way. Now, the problem with this, besides the whole like let's pretend that mental health isn't a thing, we're not going to invest in it and not going to have the proper infrastructure, is that it specifically puts the police as the first point of contact for mental health. And as you talked about, police are not trained in mental health services. Now, there are people, oh, we have crisis training, blah, blah. No. And I want to also correct this. It does not take, you don't have to have a degree to be a police officer. You have a few weeks of training and that's it. Like, you know, this is, so I was even
to become a nail tech.
Yes, it is. Because you have to have certain certifications and stuff with the state. That doesn't exist with police officers. Right. You can basically show up and it's like entry level $16 an hour, and you go through their academy, which sometimes is as little as 4 to 6 weeks. And then you are let out onto the streets. And what happens a lot of times is you do get these guys who are like, oh, well, you know, I'm a tough guy, and they want to act like a tough guy, and they're bullies, right? You get a handful of those folks. Now, I always like, you don't want to take away from the folks who are working hard and, you know, the community. However, we have to be honest about the type of folks that are attracted to this, especially with such a low bar. We have also problems with like officers who commit domestic violence in one jurisdiction and get fired and then move to other jurisdictions. And some of them land here. Okay. Happens all the time.
That's what I was just going to say. Thanks to our governor, we have all of the bad apples that everybody else is throwing out coming down here because we don't do the checks and balances that other states have instituted with all of the, you know, I hate when people say since George Floyd or since 2020, because police brutality has been a constant pretty much since
the slave patrol.
Yeah, exactly. That's where I was going back to. So police brutality has been a thing. You go back to Rodney King in the 90s. I mean, this has been ongoing. So, but since 2020, many municipalities and different police departments are taking different precautions to make sure that they do have the right people in place. So they have instituted these, what are they called? Like the
clearinghouse.
Yeah, and like the transparency where you can go in and you can see their records. You can see where there's complaints. And all the officers that get all the complaints are coming down here, getting a bonus check and all of that to come police in Florida. So that's the problem too, is we are getting an influx of these police officers that aren't wanted in, what is he calling it, in the woke states.
Yeah, well, in the places where people don't tolerate, you know, vigilante violence and tough boy, you know, tough guy, toxic masculinity. Not to mention the other part I was going to say was their connections with the Proud Boys and the insurrectionists and all that other jazz, because there is a significant portion of that. So with the Baker Act thing, just going back to close the loop on that. So yeah, you have a lot of people who that's their first line of intervention. And it can be a very dangerous situation, as we see here with this case in Fort Myers, because we do not have any other pathway for the most part for people to get emergency services. And it's terrible. It's very terrible, the whole situation. I will say, just to throw a bone to our friends at the Fort Myers PD, is that they actually do have programs where they have LCSW, licensed clinical social workers, who will come in those circumstances. I know I've met some of them that are part of that. Now, whether or not they're there at every situation, and that is not clear to me. And I was actually very surprised to hear of such a program, but I heard it from somebody who was there. He actually ended up attending a friend of mine's suicide. So it's something that we have, but it's clearly not robust enough, because, by the way, we also have a perennial, like, you know, set of openings for social workers across the board, and they leave because they're in such demand, our area quite frequently.
Right. Well, and then you consider too, like in situations like with Christopher Jordan, that wasn't a Baker Act. It wasn't a Baker Act. It was a call for a domestic dispute. So there are situations outside of Baker Acts that require mental health specialists or social workers to come out, and we're relying on the police to make that call. And honestly, that's the thing. I will throw them a bone, because we do have good officers on FMPD. I'm not going to say that we don't. We do. The problem is they're getting watered down by the ones that aren't doing the right thing, and that makes the whole department look bad. And that's my concern, is we don't need that happening. And I would like for the officers that are doing the right thing, and I've always said this going way back, is that I don't understand when good officers defend the bad ones and think that everybody's just going after after them as well. It's like, you should be the angriest when an officer is going out shooting people, beating them up, doing all of these foul things. You should be the angriest because they're making your job more dangerous and more difficult. So I wish that we saw more of that, but it's the culture. There is a culture there, that is for sure. And we have seen some police officers. I mean, I remember throughout the protests and things like that, and the mass demonstrations of police officers getting on their knee, and that was a beautiful thing to see, is police officers getting with the community and kind of grieving with them. So I don't want to take away all credit from FMPD or police officers in general, but we do need to make sure that we have proper modes of dealing with different situations. It's not a one size fits all when it comes to policing, because their responsibility is far too broad. It's far too broad. They get called out for everything. And right. I wish that weren't the case, because I think it would make it a lot more safe for them and for our communities. So.
Absolutely. All right, so let's pivot to Chantel's to-do list. She gave us a list of bills that she wanted us to talk about. So what are these bills that Chantel's interested in?
Probably HB 601. What is it? Is it 1092? Their SB 1092 is an issue, but I'm trying to, I've been writing all of the bills out, and right now, come Sunday, end of the week, my mind is jumbled. But HB 601 is fresh on mine right now. That is, speaking of police, I guess, while we're on this topic, it's co-introduced by our very own Representative Spencer Roach, and this bill would ban local governments from having or creating police review boards or law enforcement.
Oh, right. Boards. I was actually going to make that suggestion. You know what we need?
Well, and we have one. We have one in Fort Myers, but it has no teeth.
Right.
And that's part of the problem. What we have in Fort Myers is a foundation, and we need to be building on it. But instead, they're trying to wipe them out and make it impossible to create them. And actually, the NAACP helped. They were the push to get the police board that we do have, review board that we do have, but it's not enough. And now they're trying to take them all out. So it's just another power grab by the state government. I mean, to take any power that they can away from the local governments. Thank you for that. Yeah, so
I've had lots of discussions with the state about the state legislative, session, and there's a lot of crappy bills. And so, I have this little banner here ready to go. So you can call and email your state senators and representatives about the bills you don't like. You can talk specifically about House Bill 106, co-sponsored by Spencer Roach, right here representing Southwest Florida. And you can find your rep and their information at that website right there, basically State of Florida /state legislatures. If you really just Google find my rep, a bunch of stuff comes up and you can get right in there. We may do some stuff too here with Big Mouth Media to make it a little bit easier to send these letters out. We could put together something like that. But so we have House Bill 601 that is trying to eliminate any sort of community oversight over the police, because of course, when you're building a police state under an authoritarian government, you don't want oversight. But tell us a little bit about the other Senate Bill 1092, which is the criminal offenses against law enforcement officers and personnel.
Yeah, so what that's going to do is stiffen the penalties for any crime against a law enforcement officer. The scary thing about that, and I know maybe some people are like, oh, that's probably good. The scary thing about that is police can call just about anything resisting arrest. And what that would do is, instead of it being, I can't remember what degree misdemeanor it is, but it would make it either 4th degree felony, I believe, 3rd or 4th degree felony for resisting arrest. And you can correct me if I'm wrong if you have the bill in front of you. But essentially, it would create harsher penalties for things like resisting arrest, which I was letting people know the other day in the meeting, you can tug because you're being hurt by the handcuffs. You can just pull a certain way and they will call that resisting arrest. You mess with the wrong officer, they tug you around, you kind of try to protect yourself, resisting arrest. And that's a felony. And as we know in Florida, I mean, because we aren't a state that is very quick to restore rights, even though we do now.
Unless they're running for Congress. I'm sorry.
Huh?
Unless they're running for Congress.
Right.
That's as a Republican or a state Senate.
Anyway. But so, you know, you do that, you become a felon, and you lose all of your rights. So it's
right.
a bad bill, but it's a bad bill, but it's moving. It's moving.
Yeah. So that is also sponsored by Southwest Florida State Senator Jonathan Martin, you know, because his whole thing is clearly drawing things back. He's also sponsored a bill about the Confederate monument. So for the removal of any municipal official that votes against the removal of a Confederate monument, they can be removed by the governor. Like, it's ridiculous. But this one, 1092, I believe, and I'm trying to pull up the text of it, but it's kind of going pretty slow. This also talks about recording of police officers as an act that could be elevated in terms of its consequences. So previously, and I probably continuously, recording a police officer is considered part of your First Amendment rights. To be able to do that, it makes it so that you can't come within 14 feet of an officer and record them. So that will be a fascinating component of this, because of course, if it's hard to imagine these arbitrary numbers, but 14 feet is quite far away, right? And so they are trying to make it both more difficult for people to record officers and what they're doing, and have a way to then arrest those people, because if they come within the 14 feet, then it violates this law. So
right.
So yeah, that's going to be one that we're going to want to protest. And then we're also going to want to vote both of these chuckleheads out, because, this is the type of stuff they're doing. And here's the thing that bothers me on it more so than just about anything else is, like, we don't have this epidemic of people maligning police officers in the state of Florida via video, right? That it's necessary for us to have this kind of law. We also don't have, this outlandish, criminal crisis where we would need to have, these additional problems, or we don't have a problem that this legislation is solving, right? Like, this legislation is red meat for their base. That's what this is. Yeah. And it's going to hurt us, because making laws just to win political points is a bad strategy.
Right. And that's what I really want people to understand, is that laws are enacted to either, like you said, remedy a problem or bring benefit to constituents. And so many of these bills are just so unnecessary. And the sad thing about it is what they're doing is distracting from things that we do really need. Problems that really do need to be remedied are being just completely neglected over this stuff that is meaning-less. I mean, right. It won't be meaningless once enacted, but it solves zero problems.
Yeah, it's causing problems. It's causing a problem and solving it through legislation. Like, and the thing that's so funny, that's like what I think about the Confederate flag one. I'm like, what, dude? Like we already did this, right? Like, now it's like you're going to put these stupid things back up. Like, that's what we're doing, and that's a thing that we have to address in the Senate here in State Senate here in 2024. Okay.
Well, do you know what it does for them? And this is what frustrates the hell out of me as a history buff, okay? Especially when it comes to anything having to do with Black history and civil rights. That is my field of study when it comes to political science and history. So I get so irritated when State Senator Jonathan Martin is like, well, this is for the sake of history. We need to remember history. And someone else on the news that was interviewed that was like, we need to keep history, good and the bad. What? Aren't you the same people that are saying we can't talk about slavery because it's going to make white kids feel bad about themselves? What?
Yeah, it doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be consistent. They know this. It's because it's just blowing smoke. It's just doing all this stuff. They know they're not consistent. They don't care. No. By the way, Jonathan Martin's from Iowa, so he wasn't even on a side in the Confederate.
You were not even in existence, bro. Yeah. So keep your comments to yourself. Well, and not only that, what it instills in people's minds is that these statues were put here during the Civil War. No, they were put there during the Civil Rights Movement to intimidate Black people from participating in governmental affairs and to engage civically. So no, they weren't. The purpose of them was intimidation.
100%.
And so it's so frustrating because I'm like, quit talking about history that you know nothing about, people.
Yeah, they don't even know that. That's part of the problem.
Book. Those are straight from Jim Crow South. Like that's what they are.
Listen,
went downtown 1966. 1966 that was put up right after when the Voting Rights Act was passed.
Yep, exactly. Well, and the Fort Myers, was related to the desegregation lawsuit that was filed.
Mm-hmm.
So it was specifically designed to stop and intimidate the Black community from seeking equal access to education.
Right.
Disgusting.
So I'm like, yeah, you're right. Let's remember all history. Let's put all that Civil War shit, all the Confederate shit in a museum and put it in a shameful corner where we can all shame it and say, these are the enemies of the state that tried to secede and break up the Union. Let's call them what they were, not honor them in our state and city buildings, acting like they were heroes. They were not. And anyone that calls themselves a patriot, please do not call yourself a patriot in front of me having anything to say about Robert E. Lee.
Well, what's funny is I know for a fact that the museums in the city of Fort Myers didn't want anything to do with that stupid statue. It didn't even belong to the city of Fort Myers. Furthermore, if we're going to do it, let's do the whole thing. Let's let everybody know. Let's remind everybody that the Fort Myers Regiment was an all Black regiment in the South. It was the furthest south Union post. That's what Fort Myers is. Let's remind everybody.
I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah. And the Black regiment kicked the shit out of the Confederates here, sent them running back to their mama. And then basically they did get to take over after because the Union pulled the other soldiers back and off they went. Right. And then they were left with these boo-hoo crying Confederates who got their ass whooped by the Union all Black regiment here in Fort Myers. Let's get that history on front page.
Right. And let's also remember that none of this would have happened had not Reconstruction ended as a compromise to get a president elected. Like, we would have perhaps not, people, and even I have compared this to Germany and the Holocaust. Like, the Holocaust is a shameful part of Germany's past, and they memorialize it as such. The United States never had, and these statues are just a representation of, we lost, but did we really? Did we really? Because we gained control back of the South and we did whatever the F we wanted.
Right.
That's what really happened. That's what really happened. And those statues or anything about the Confederacy is just a reminder of that. Oh, yeah. And we have to fight diligently to say, no, actually, you lost.
Right. Well, and that was the whole reason that this county was named Lee County.
Right.
And it wasn't because Robert E. Lee was here. It was because Colonel Hendry, who got his ass kicked by the all Black regiment in Fort Myers, was so hurt by all of that when they annexed this land to form a new county, they called it Lee County as a big middle finger to the North. I mean, let's call a spade because that's exactly what that was.
Right.
All right, but we probably don't want to bore people with our history nerdery.
I know. Call us for a history lesson, though, if you really want one. If you really want to know the lowdown on the real history of the United States, call Cindy and I. We will guide you through.
We'll let you know the real situation.
We'll take it all the way back to 1619.
There you go. Let's do that. I should throw that into my class nowadays too. And I'm like, oh yeah. just to test the waters. Yeah. All right, good. So are we coming to the end? Is there anything else to jump on today? for the good of the order.
Yeah.
You've been in a few board meetings the last couple of weeks, huh?
I mean, I have another one tonight. Yeah,
I think
been
I do.
busy.
I'm not sure if I'm going to make it.
This is what happens when you live in Florida. You either jump in or you what? Cry? Sit and cry about it? No.
No, we jump in. We jump in. But I wouldn't jump into the pond behind you. Who knows what kind of critters are in there?
Definitely not. There's actually just some fish. There are some ducks out there swimming, but
Alligator.
lately, we haven't had a gator in there in a long time. Now, I have had gators in there, but not in a while. And
they go where they want, though.
They do. Those gators, man, they'll just show up. And the last few we've had, they were smaller, but the smaller ones are more aggressive. Like I had one lunge out of the water at me. I was like, okay, boy, you got to go. You can't stay here. Because then I have to put my goats away and keep everybody safe and all of that.
If you make Sarah move her goats, then all bets are off.
I'm probably not going to be happy about it. My goats do what they want.
All right. And on the end of the goats, let's call this the end of the episode for Juice Fresh Talk here. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us for this. It was a good conversation. And stay up to date on what's going on in your state legislature. Stay up to date what's going on, and definitely get involved in the initiative to make sure and hold Fort Myers police accountable. So thank you. Thank you so much, Sarah, for giving us all this amazing information.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you, Cindy. It's always a pleasure. I will say one last thing. If you're available to come to the city council meeting tomorrow, that's Monday at 4:30, wear white in support of demanding justice for Christopher Jordan, and his family will be there. So come show them some love and support. Also Tuesday, 4:30, school board meeting. They're trying to remove an inclusivity flag from a Lee County school, and we will be there to counter rally against them. Wear purple. If you need any further information, let us know. We're happy to help you or guide you in the right direction to fight back in this crazy state that we live in. That we love. Yeah.
It's our home. All right. Thank you so much. This has been Juice Fresh Talk with Sarah Wilson and Cindy Banyai, sitting into also for our friend Chantel Rhodes. If you enjoyed this, we'd love to have your support. Subscribe at bigmouthmediafl.com. You can get monthly subscriptions for $4.99 a month. You can get everything that Big Mouth Media has to offer for $19.99 a month, and you help keep independent media alive here in the state of Florida, where it is so needed, because clearly the regular media ain't cutting it. So check that out on the plans and pricing page on Big Mouth Media. And of course, you can tune into all the audio versions of our podcasts on our website or wherever you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, Audible, wherever you can find podcasts, you can find the juice in all of the podcasts from the Big Mouth Media Network. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.